So Facebook decided to pull Richard Spencer's various pages from their website. Most of you probably know who this guy is by now, but if you don't, I'll tell you. He's the head of the National Policy Institute, which I know sounds like it's really official National Policy Institute. But understand, that's one of the oldest tricks in the book, is you name something official sounding, but what the goal of this thing is anything but official. It's as extreme as possible. The goal is to advocate a white ethno-state. So it's called the National Policy Institute, but in reality it should be called like the Nazi Institute or some shit. Because they want a white ethno-state. So they want an all-white America, and I don't know. I'm sure there's differing opinions within the membership of the National Policy Institute, but I'm sure some of them, the more kind white nationalists, all they want to do is deport all the non-white people, even if they're American and they were born here and all, doesn't matter. Deport all the non-white people. How kind you are. I'm sure there's some that are part of this institute that want to kill and do a genocide of all non-white people. But either way, this is an extremist group that we're talking about here. So the National Policy Institute page was pulled that had about 4,000 followers. And then Spencer's online magazine, altright.com, had a Facebook page with more than 10,000 followers. And that was pulled as well. So Zuckerberg was asked in congressional testimony recently, and he said, listen, Facebook, we don't tolerate hate groups. But then what happened was, I think it was Vice News or some media outlet contacted Facebook and was like, really? Because we just looked it up and we found like whatever, a couple hundred of them or something. And so they let Facebook know, and then Facebook that day went and pulled all the pages for all those people. So this is one of those issues where there's a split on the left as to what the right thing to do is. I have a clear opinion on it. I think you all know what that opinion is. I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have pulled it. First of all, he only has 4,000 followers for the National Policy Institute and only a little over 10,000 for altright.com. That means that's not that many. Okay? But even if it was a lot, I would still keep it. Because I think that the more people see what this guy's about, the more they say, hey, fuck him. In fact, that's what happened. A friend of mine spoke to me about this and was like, I literally didn't know what the alt-right was until they saw the video of that conference that they had in Washington. And Richard Spencer gave a speech and started saying, hail Trump, hail our people, hail victory. Hail victory, that's Sieg Heil. That's what fucking Hitler said. And then people in the audience were all doing the fucking Hitler salute. So a friend of mine was telling me, I didn't know how bad they were. Then I saw how bad they were, and I was like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. You're Nazis. Got it. So I think the more you show people what they are, the better, because that hurts them. The worst thing you do is you ban them, you push them underground, and then you're making it like a counterculture, edgy thing that people are like, ooh, we're not allowed to say these things. Therefore, it must be cool, because that's why everybody shuns it. Reality is, if you just let these guys have their fucking say, I think that turns more people off to them. But even if you don't buy that argument, and I understand there are people that don't buy that argument, I don't know why you should buy it. All the evidence points in that direction. I mean, for example, remember when these idiots were protesting to keep a Confederate statue up? By the way, great way to spend your time. I'm so offended and triggered that you're taking down a fucking Confederate statue. Wow. But what happened was they had the tiki torches and the White Lives Matter shit they were chanting, and all the Jews will not replace us, super racist and anti-Semitic and all that. But what happened was the very next event, people forget about that, the very next event when they were scheduled to protest again, there were only like 12 of them and thousands of counter-protesters. So that's what happens. When you show it to the world goes, fuck you. But again, so even if you don't buy that argument, fine, fair enough. But there's another reason why you should say, hey, Facebook, don't do this. Now, to be clear, they have every legal right to do it. Because anybody who's familiar with the legality of the First Amendment knows that just stops the government from persecuting you or locking you up over speech. So, but that's where it's limited. In other words, it doesn't, if you get banned from Twitter or banned from Facebook or social media, they're private companies. They have every right to do it. But what I'm arguing is just beyond the legal right of the First Amendment. I'm arguing for the principle of the First Amendment, which means even though Twitter and Facebook have the right to ban people like this, I'm arguing they shouldn't do that even though they have the right to do it. Because it's the principle of the First Amendment that matters, which I think goes beyond just the legality of the First Amendment and what is and isn't constitutional. But here's the reason why you should still say, hey man, they shouldn't ban it. Because, okay, so they pull white nationalists. That's what this is. We're going to pull white nationalists because they're hate groups. And you know what? I don't agree with the pulling them, but do I think they're hate groups? Of course. Yeah, I think what they do is hate. No doubt about it. But then that brings up an interesting legal question. What do you do with black nationalists? Now, for example, Malcolm X was a black nationalist as he got in his older years and when he left the Nation of Islam, and he became a lot more like Martin Luther King Jr. He was originally the super hardline guy who said we need a black nation and we're not for segregation, we're for separation from white people. That's what he argued. He argued that black people in the U.S. should be treated like Israel with the Jews, how the UN should say, here's a piece of land and you get your own land and it's the all-black state, basically. So he was a black separatist. He was a black nationalist. Now, we all, at least reasonable people, understand that that's not exactly the same thing as being a white nationalist. Because you could argue, hey, it was the historical oppression of black people in this country, slavery, segregation, that makes it a reaction to the dominant society, so it's not morally equivalent to that of white nationalism. And I think that's a fair argument to make. However, all you need to do is acknowledge that there are some people who are going to say black nationalism is exactly equivalent to white nationalism, because you're saying we're going to base a state on our ethnic identity. In that sense, it is equivalent. But all you need is some people to say it is exactly the same thing, just a mirror image. Forget the context. And then that raises an interesting question. If you're going to ban white nationalists, there is certainly an argument that you should ban black nationalists too. Nation of Islam, gone. Any black nationalist movements, even if they cloak themselves in the argument of we're doing it because we believe in equality, we're doing it because we believe in civil rights, you can come with a wagon of rationalizations. But there are going to be some people who say, no, that's exactly the same thing, white nationalism and black nationalism. Just a mirror image. They're reverse extremes. So if you ban white nationalists, you're probably going to put Facebook in a position where if they don't ban black nationalists, you go, okay, well, you're hypocrites, and that's bullshit, okay? Or they ban it, and then people turn around and go, well, now you're racist because you ban the black nationalists. And then, okay, so let's say you ban white nationalists, and then black nationalists is up in the air. Well, what about communists? You know? Now, again, you could say, well, that's not objectively as hateful as Nazism. But what you guys need to understand is, even if that's true, all you need is some people to say it is, and then you're fucked. And then they probably will ban communists. Because the argument that a lot of people make is, whether or not you buy the argument is irrelevant. This is the argument some people are going to make, and this is an argument that ultimately might end up being the final straw that makes the decision for them where they do ban communists, where they'll say, look at the body count. Look at the body count of people who died under Nazism and fascism, and then look at the body count of people who died under communism. And they could say the communist body count is even worse than the fascist body count. So what are you going to do? You're going to leave the communists but ban the fascists? That doesn't seem to make much sense. Now, again, you don't have to buy that argument. But somebody is going to make that argument, and that argument might be the final argument that they make these decisions based off of. So if you ban white nationalists, they're going to want to ban black nationalists. If you ban fascists, they're going to want to ban communists. What about, for example, this is a perfect example of why you shouldn't go down this slippery slope. What about atheists who live in theocracies? What about that? So you and I look at atheists and we go, oh, that's a legitimate minority group that has as much right as anybody else to speak about anything, okay? But atheists in theocracies are tarred as blasphemous, dangerous, undermining the entire system, doing hate speech against the dominant majority in our ideology and our belief system, namely religion. In most cases around the world today, if you live in a theocracy, Islamic theocracy. So, and we've seen this. Facebook has done business with all these different governments around the world, and they do what those governments tell them to do. In Israel, try being a Palestinian group on Facebook. They've banned so many pro-Palestine groups because Facebook is working with Israel, and Israel says, oh, they're doing hate speech, oh, they're anti-Semitic, and then Israel pulls the page, pro-BDS pages, pro-Palestine freedom movement pages. So this is the point. When we have these debates and have these conversations, they don't happen in a fucking vacuum. They happen with context everywhere. And these arguments are going to be made once you start banning people. You could avoid the whole conversation, just not ban anybody. That's what I would do. I would say, no, we allow everybody. The only things that's not allowed are direct threats of violence, libel and slander, and libel and slander notoriously are hard to prove, and they should be hard to prove. You know what I mean? And direct threats of violence, yes, you should be banned for that, and you should be banned for doxing or whatever. Actual crimes, banned. Outside of that, it's got to be all systems go, let anything happen. Because once you start nitpicking, there's no end to the nitpicking. There's no end to it. And again, you don't even have to buy the argument of equivalence between these groups. But somebody will make the point that they're equivalent, and then whoever's making decisions might say, I agree with that argument more than the people who say it's not equivalent. Again, black nationalists versus white nationalists, fascists versus communists. To go back to the example of atheists in religious countries and theocracies, those governments will tell Facebook, no, if you want to operate in our country, you're going to ban whatever, atheists in Saudi Arabia, atheists in Iran, obviously they don't allow Facebook, but whatever, atheists in some theocracy, you're going to ban atheist groups in our country because under our laws, that's hateful. They're doing hate speech against us, and we need to put a stop to that. Now, again, none of that's true. Atheists are not actually doing hate speech. They're not actually doing anything wrong. They should be able to voice their opinion. But when Facebook starts banning people and starts bending to the will of, hey, don't allow this, do allow that, don't allow that, well, then everybody's going to have an argument. It's not only you in the world who gets to dictate what should and shouldn't be allowed. And what offends me is very different from what offends a fucking Ted Cruz fan. What offends me is very different than what offends a fucking random Saudi prince who's in favor of all these repressive policies. So in my mind, you draw a clean line and say, no, we don't ban anybody based on that. If it's doxing, if it's direct threats of violence, yes, we'll ban them. But outside of that, no, we don't ban anybody. Accept the rules or don't accept the rules. But they're not doing that. Facebook loves to just immediately fucking cave and just give, all the pressure from the government. And what's their argument? Oh, you better filter fake news. Fucking Russia's bad. I hope you're stopping fucking propaganda from Russia on... And so now they're begging Silicon Valley oligarchs to filter what news you do see and don't see. And you're supposed to trust Mark Zuckerberg's judgment as to what's a legitimate news story and what's not. I don't trust that motherfucker's judgment. But this is what's happening. And now they're going down the fucking slippery slope of, well, we'll ban white nationalists because they're white nationalists. Will you ban black nationalists? Hey, we'll ban fascists. Will you ban... And by the way, one of their sources that they said, the Southern Poverty Law Center was one of their sources. Listen, the Southern Poverty Law Center has done a lot of great work, so I don't want to act like I'm 100% against them. I'm not. But they've also done some questionable shit. They've added guys who, by the way, I don't agree with this guy a lot. There's a guy named Majid Nawaz who's a fucking, ex-Muslim. I think he's a little bit of a pompous douchebag. But he's not a fucking hate merchant, but they added him to their list of, anti-Muslim hate group shit. That's the Southern Poverty Law Center. They just added Rania Khalek and fucking Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton to a group of, they pulled down this article, thank goodness. But they acted fucking propping up dictators and they do hate speech. What the fuck? All because they don't want to do regime change in Syria. So in other words, none of this stuff is not objective and scientific and broken down as to we know these people are extreme and these people aren't. A lot of it's a matter of opinion and trying to figure it out, but what they're doing is banning Richard Spencer, and who knows where the fuck that slippery slope ends. In my mind, that slippery slope does not end. because that immediately leads to banning the black nationalists and banning the communists and fucking, I mean, you could really do stretch arguments here. Say I'm a hate speech guy because I curse at fucking world leaders as I rant against them or whatever. You know, you could argue my promoting of atheism is dangerous in some countries because of their theocracies and blah, 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 blah. And those arguments aren't true, but they don't have to be true. They just need to be true enough for the idiots in power to make it a move against them. And that's what I'm afraid of, and that's why I wouldn't have banned Richard Spencer, and I hope you see the logic of that.